The morning train always followed the same rhythm. The metallic groan of the doors, the quiet shuffle of passengers finding seats, the soft murmur of half-awake conversations, and the hum of wheels against the tracks. It was a world between worlds, neither the beginning of the day nor the end, a liminal space where strangers coexisted in silence. Daniel had grown used to the routine. Every morning at 7:15 sharp, he boarded the eastbound train that carried him from his small apartment in the suburbs into the heart of the city. He always sat on the left side, 3 rows back from the door, his headphones in but the music turned low enough that he could hear the announcements. His ritual was comforting, predictable, the kind of quiet stability he needed to face the chaos of the office waiting for him downtown. But one morning something shifted. He noticed her. She slipped into the train at the very last second, as the warning chime echoed and the doors threatened to close. She was carrying a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder, her hair slightly messy as though she had run to make it in time. She sat down across the aisle diagonally from him and pulled out a book so old its spine was cracked. Cover was faded, but he could just make out the title, Wuthering Heights. For some reason, the sight of her reading that book made his chest tighten. Most people on the train scrolled endlessly on their phones or dozed off, but she was somewhere else entirely. Her lips moved slightly as though she whispered the words to herself, and every so often she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her brow furrowing with concentration. Daniel tried not to stare. He told himself it was rude, that she would notice, that it was none of his business who she was or what she read. And yet, his eyes wandered back again and again as though pulled by gravity. The train rattled on, the morning sun spilling through the windows in fractured beams. He thought about saying something, but the idea evaporated as quickly as it arrived. What would he even say? Nice book? Do you like tragic love stories? No, it would sound forced, awkward. Better to keep to himself. The next day, she was there again. Same seat, same timing, a hurried entrance just before the doors slid shut. Her bag looked heavier that morning, as though filled with notebooks or papers. This time, she wasn't reading but instead staring out the window, her reflection flickering against the glass as the train rushed past rows of houses, graffiti-painted walls, and stretches of trees. And again, Daniel found himself watching. Not in a way that demanded her attention, but in quiet curiosity. There was something about her presence that unsettled his routine. He caught himself lowering the volume on his music just to hear the faint sigh she let out, the sound of her flipping through the pages of her journal. Days turned into weeks, and she became part of his commute. He never learned her name, never heard her speak, but he memorized the little things, the way she always carried a thermos of coffee, the way she chewed the end of her pen when writing, the way her foot tapped when she was lost in thought. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was the stranger on the train. And she noticed him too. First, Daniel thought it was his imagination. A fleeting glance, nothing more. But then he caught her looking, not just once but several times. Their eyes would meet, quickly dart away, then meet again in some unspoken rhythm neither of them acknowledged aloud. It was subtle, but it was real. One morning, he dropped his phone and it clattered against the floor. She leaned forward instinctively, as though ready to pick it up, but he grabbed it just before she could. Their eyes met in the brief moment that followed, and something unspoken passed between them, a tiny spark, fleeting yet undeniable. Trains screeched to a halt at the next station, jostling passengers as they stood up. She adjusted her bag, preparing to leave. Daniel felt a pang of disappointment, though he didn't know why. He had no claim on her, no reason to feel the hollow ache that settled in his chest as she walked past him toward the doors. But then, just before stepping off, she glanced back. It wasn't a long look, only a second or two, but it was enough. Enough for Daniel to feel something shift inside him, like the first page of a story being turned. From that morning on, the train was no longer just a routine. It was a place of possibility, of quiet anticipation. He didn't know her name, her story, her destination. But he knew one thing. This stranger was no longer invisible to him. And judging by the way she had looked back, he wasn't invisible to her either. The following week carried with it a new kind of energy. Daniel, who once boarded the 7:15 train with mechanical precision and a half-conscious haze, now felt a strange sense of expectation every morning. He checked his watch more often. He lingered by the doors, scanning the crowd of incoming passengers. His headphones stayed tucked into his pocket, forgotten, because now the rhythmic hum of the train was filled with a more intriguing soundtrack, the possibility of seeing her again. And she was there. Always just in time, always sliding through the narrowing doors, her bag slung across her body as though it weighed nothing. Sometimes she read, sometimes she wrote, sometimes she simply gazed outside, but whatever she did, Daniel noticed. He noticed it all. The glances continued. They grew longer, less hesitant. First, she had looked away quickly, cheeks faintly pink as though embarrassed to be caught. But now, she held his gaze for a moment longer before turning back to her journal or her book. That silent acknowledgement sent a rush through Daniel's chest, quiet, electric, undeniable. One morning it happened. He was flipping through his work notes on his tablet when the train jerked unexpectedly, throwing him slightly off balance. His pen rolled from his lap and clattered to the aisle floor. Before he could bend down to retrieve it, a hand appeared, slender fingers curling around the pen. When he looked up, she was holding it out to him with a small, polite smile. "Thanks," he said, his voice coming out quieter than he intended. She nodded, her eyes soft, then returned to her seat without a word. But for Daniel, the world felt different after that brief exchange. She had spoken to him, not with words but with action. She had acknowledged him. The next day, he tried to repay the gesture. She entered as usual, late but not flustered, and settled into her seat. He noticed she fumbled with her bag longer than normal, and then realized why. Her coffee thermos had a small crack at the lid, leaking onto the strap of her bag. Without thinking, Daniel pulled a folded napkin from his pocket. He always carried extras from his rushed breakfast stops, and held it out across the aisle. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, but then she smiled, truly smiled, and took the napkin with a grateful nod. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was warmer than he imagined, smooth with just a trace of morning raspiness. "Any time," he replied, and for the first time it didn't feel awkward. Felt natural. From that morning, the unspoken barrier between them seemed thinner. Their eyes met more easily, their smiles less restrained. Daniel began to notice that she didn't just rush into the train, she looked for him. Her gaze flickered toward his usual seat almost immediately after boarding, a subtle confirmation that their silent connection wasn't one-sided. Till neither spoke much. Their interactions remained brief, simple, confined to the boundaries of politeness. But underneath, a current of possibility thrummed louder each day. And then came the Friday morning. Train was unusually crowded, every seat filled and passengers packed into the aisles. Daniel was standing, his usual spot taken, pressed between a businessman scrolling furiously on his phone and a teenager blasting music through tinny headphones. He glanced around and saw her, standing a few rows away, clutching the rail above her head for balance. Their eyes met across the crowd. Chaos of voices, the squeal of brakes, the announcements blaring over the speaker, all of it faded. It was just her. The train lurched suddenly, and the wave of passengers swayed together. She stumbled slightly, her hands slipping from the rail. Without hesitation, Daniel pushed through the narrow gap between bodies and reached her, steadying her with his hand against her arm. "You okay?" he asked, his voice raised over the din. "Yes," she said, her breath catching slightly. "Thank you." Their eyes lingered on each other, closer now than they had ever been. The air between them seemed charged, humming with unspoken words. The train slowed, pulling into the next station, and the crowd shifted again. Daniel reluctantly let go of her arm, though the warmth of her skin seemed to linger against his palm. As passengers filed off, she leaned closer, her lips near his ear. "You always sit by the window, don't you?" He blinked in surprise, then smiled. "I do." And just like that, she turned away, moving with the departing crowd until she was gone. Daniel remained rooted in place, his heart pounding as if he had just run miles. She had noticed him. Not just his existence, not just the occasional glance. She had noticed his habits, his seat, his presence. It was a small sentence, just a handful of words, but it meant more than he could have ever expected. From that morning on, Daniel knew this was no longer coincidence. The stranger on the train was no longer just a passenger in his routine. She was becoming part of his story. The following Monday, Daniel boarded the train earlier than usual. He told himself it was because of work, that he had tasks to prepare before arriving at the office. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted to see her. And she arrived. Just as the doors were about to close, she slipped inside, cheeks flushed from the brisk morning air, her hair falling across her face. She scanned the rows of seats almost immediately, and when her eyes landed on him by the window, her lips curved into a smile, not shy, not tentative, but deliberate. She walked over, hesitating only for a second before sitting down in the empty seat beside him. Daniel's heart gave a sharp, unexpected jolt. For weeks they had shared only glances and brief words. Now she was right there, close enough for him to smell the faint citrus of her perfume, close enough for her shoulder to brush against his when the train shifted. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. For a moment, silence hung between them. The train rattled on, passengers murmured, pages of newspapers rustled. Then she tilted her head slightly toward him, her expression playful. "You really do always take the window seat," she said. Daniel chuckled, grateful for the opening. "And you always rush in at the last second." Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Guilty. I like to think it keeps life exciting." He grinned. "Or stressful. Depends on your perspective." Their laughter mingled, easy and light. Tension that had built over weeks of stolen glances seemed to melt away, replaced by a warmth that felt startlingly natural. "I'm Daniel," he said, offering his hand. She looked at it, then at him, her lips curving into a smile before she shook it. "Clara." "Nice to finally meet you, Clara." "Finally," she teased. "Well, I've been sharing a train with you for weeks. I figured introductions were overdue." She laughed, the sound soft and melodic. "Fair point." From then on, the ride passed in a blur of conversation. They talked about the small things first, her journal, the books she carried, the coffee shop near the station. She told him she was an illustrator, working freelance, which explained her flexible schedule and the sketchbook she always carried. He shared that he worked in marketing, a job he liked well enough but didn't exactly love. "You don't sound passionate about it," Clara noted, studying him with curious eyes. Daniel shrugged. "It pays the bills. Gives me stability." "But," she prompted gently. He hesitated, surprised by how easily she saw through him. "But sometimes I wonder if I should be doing something else. Something more creative, maybe. Writing, photography. I don't know." Clara's expression softened. "Then maybe you should. Stability is nice, but so is happiness." Her words lingered with him long after they were spoken. He wasn't used to strangers, anyone, cutting to the heart of things so quickly. As the train neared their station, Daniel felt a twinge of disappointment. He didn't want the ride to end. But then Clara glanced at him, her lips twitching into a small smile. See you tomorrow? She asked. His chest warmed. Definitely. The next morning and the next after that, Clara sat beside him. Their conversations deepened, stretching beyond small talk into confessions and shared dreams. She told him about her childhood by the sea, how she still sketched waves when she needed comfort. He told her about his love for travel, the photographs he took but rarely showed anyone. She teased him for being shy about them, insisting one day he'd have to let her see. Train rides that once felt like routine now became the best part of his day. 40 minutes together, wrapped in the rhythm of the tracks, a world that felt theirs alone. But as their bond grew, so did the awareness of its fragility. This was still the morning train. Their time existed in a bubble that began at 7:15 and ended when the doors opened to spill them into the chaos of the city. Daniel found himself lying awake at night, wondering, what happens when the train isn't enough? One Friday, as they stepped off the platform together, Clara surprised him. She turned to him with a hesitant smile, her eyes glinting with something almost nervous. "Do you?" she began, then paused, adjusting the strap of her bag. "Do you want to maybe grab coffee sometime? Off the train, I mean." For a heartbeat, Daniel could only stare at her, stunned. Then he smiled, his chest light, his answer immediate. "I'd like that. A lot." Clara's smile widened, bright and genuine. "Good. Tomorrow then? Same cafe near the station?" "Tomorrow," he agreed, his pulse thrumming with excitement. As she walked away, Daniel realized this was no longer just a story about two strangers on a train. It was becoming something more. Something real. Their first coffee outside the train turned into lunch. Lunch turned into an impromptu walk through the park. And before Daniel knew it, he and Clara were spending weekends together as naturally as if it had always been that way. He discovered she laughed with her whole body, shoulders shaking, eyes crinkling. She discovered he had a habit of taking candid photos when she wasn't looking, though he always insisted they were just practice. Train was no longer the only thread holding them together. It was simply where their story had begun. One Sunday evening, as they sat in a little diner by the river, Clara stirred her tea with unusual quietness. Daniel noticed immediately. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. She hesitated, eyes lowered, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I got an offer," she finally said. "A big one. A design firm in Paris wants me to join their team for a year. It's everything I've been working toward." Daniel's heart lurched. Paris. Thousands of miles away. The words hung between them like a shadow. "That's incredible," he managed, forcing a smile. "You deserve it." Her gaze lifted to meet his, full of conflicting emotions. But it would mean leaving. In a month. The diner suddenly felt too small, the hum of conversation around them too loud. Daniel searched for words, but all he found was the hollow ache in his chest. "I don't want to hold you back," he said quietly. Clara reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "You're not. You never could." "But," she trailed off, her eyes glistening, "I don't know what this means for us." Truth was, neither did he. They had only just begun, the fragile, beautiful beginning of something that felt destined. And now it might be stolen away by distance, by time, by circumstance. That night, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling, his phone beside him silent. He thought of Clara's smile, her laughter, the way she tilted her head when she was curious. He thought of the train rides that had become the anchor of his days. The thought of losing her before they had a chance to truly begin was unbearable. Over the next week, their time together became bittersweet. They still laughed, still shared moments that felt timeless, but beneath it all was the unspoken knowledge that every day brought them closer to goodbye. One morning, as the train rocked gently beneath them, Clara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think," she murmured, "that maybe we met too late?" Daniel tightened his arm around her. Or maybe just in time. Her breath caught, but she didn't argue. Instead, she closed her eyes and they rode in silence, the city rushing past the windows, neither ready to let go. As the departure date drew nearer, Daniel felt a weight pressing heavier on his chest. He tried to be supportive, to encourage her to take the opportunity, but each word tasted like betrayal. One evening, sitting in his apartment, he stared at the photos on his camera, candid shots of Clara laughing, walking, sketching, her hair caught by the wind. He realized then that he couldn't just let her slip away without saying what he truly felt. The next morning on the train, he turned to her. His pulse hammered in his throat, but his voice was steady. "Clara, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, brows furrowing slightly. "I don't want you to go," he said, the words raw, unpolished, spilling straight from his chest. "I know this is everything you've dreamed of, and I'd never forgive myself if I stood in the way of that. But I can't pretend it doesn't break me to think of you leaving. Because somewhere along the way, he drew a breath. I fell in love with you." The train seemed to fade, the noise, the people, everything blurring until it was only her, Clara, staring at him with wide, glistening eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing. His heart pounded, terror clawing at him that he'd ruined everything. Then she whispered, almost trembling, "I love you too." Relief crashed through him so hard it was almost dizzying. But then her words wavered, heavy with uncertainty. "Which makes this even harder." She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I don't know what to do, Daniel." Neither did he. Train pulled into the station, the doors sliding open, but neither of them moved. They just sat there, hands entwined, suspended in a moment that felt like the edge of something vast: love, loss, possibility, heartbreak. For the first time, Daniel realized that their story might not be defined by the train at all. Might be defined by the choices they made next. The week before Clara's departure felt like a countdown Daniel couldn't stop. Each moment with her was brighter and sharper, colored by the shadow of goodbye. They went on long walks through the city, visited bookshops, and shared quiet meals where conversation danced between laughter and silence too heavy for words. Every time she smiled, his chest ached with the knowledge that soon she might be gone. On her last Friday before Paris, Clara invited Daniel to her apartment. The small space was filled with sketchbooks, rolls of paper, and art supplies scattered like confetti. She handed him a cup of tea and sat on the couch beside him. "I can't believe it's almost here," she whispered, staring at her packed suitcase by the door. Daniel tried to smile, but it faltered. "Neither can I." She turned toward him, her eyes full of conflict. "Daniel, this is everything I've ever wanted." "But the thought of leaving you," her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her lips. "I don't know if I can do it." His heart leapt, hope surging like a wave he had been holding back. "Then don't," he said softly. "Stay. We'll figure it out together." But she shook her head. "It's not that simple. If I stay, I'll always wonder. And if I go, I'll always wonder about you." Daniel reached for her hand, pulling it gently into his. "Then maybe we don't have to wonder. Maybe we can face it together. Paris isn't the end, Clara. It's just a different kind of beginning." Her breath caught, her eyes searching his. "You mean you'd come visit?" "I'll do more than visit," he said, his voice steady with newfound determination. "I'll be there as much as I can. We'll call, text, video chat. I'll save every penny for tickets. Distance won't change how I feel about you. If anything, it'll prove it." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they came with a smile. "You'd really do that?" "I love you," Daniel whispered. "That's not something I leave behind." She threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. He held her tightly, as if he could anchor her in place, but in his heart he knew love wasn't about holding someone back. It was about giving them wings. The day of her departure, Daniel went with her to the station. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Another train, but this one meant something entirely different. As the platform buzzed with travelers, Clara stood with her suitcase, her hand clasped firmly in his. "This isn't goodbye," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "No," he agreed. "It's just see you soon." She kissed him, a kiss filled with promise, with longing, with a certainty that distance couldn't erase what they had built. When she pulled back, she smiled through her tears. "I'll be waiting for you in Paris," she whispered. "And I'll find you," Daniel said. Train's whistle blew. She gave his hand one last squeeze before stepping aboard. He stood there as the train pulled away, his chest tight but his heart strangely light. 'Cause for the first time he believed her words. Months passed. They called every night, sharing stories of their days, laughing until the screen froze, sometimes falling asleep with the phone still connected. Daniel saved every bit he could, and by spring he boarded a flight to Paris. When he stepped off the train at Gare du Nord, searching the crowd, he saw her, Clara, waiting with a bouquet of sunflowers, her smile brighter than he had ever seen. He dropped his bag and ran to her. She met him halfway, their embrace fierce, their laughter breaking into tears. Around them, the city swirled with strangers, but for Daniel it was as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "You came," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Of course I did," he said, holding her close. "I told you, love doesn't care about distance." From that day forward, trains no longer reminded Daniel of loss. They reminded him of beginnings. Of the girl with the sketchbook, the smile that changed his world, and the love that crossed every mile. And as he walked hand in hand with Clara through the streets of Paris, he knew their story was only just beginning.